Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the show that brings you the most important conversation in art, culture, and ideas. And today we continue a theme of ecology and the environment in Malaysia. And I have two very interesting young people with me who are going to help me through a discussion of their project. It's called ImagiNASI, which is an attempt to rediscover nature through food. And we're here at the Biodiversity Indigenous Garden, or next to it rather, because you can tell we're still next to a building, but we're going to be walking through that garden very shortly and giving you a sense of how, even in this urban landscape that we live in, there can be issues of nature and the environment that we perhaps sometimes don't think about. So thank you very much, Benjamin and Syuhada, for joining me. So I'm going to just very quickly introduce them. Benjamin Ong, he's an Applied Imagination Fellow with the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University, and also one of the founders of Urban Biodiversity Initiative, or UBI. And Syuhada Sapno, or Siti Syuhada Sapno, is the creative director of UBI, UBI being the Urban Biodiversity Initiative. So, okay, so we've established who you are, but you're both trained as ecologists, and maybe, Benjamin, start with you. Why this project, and how does it relate to your own field of inquiry and your professional life?
So thanks, Sharaad, for inviting us to this. I think we started out as ecology students at the University of Malaya in and actually we met when I was working at the Rimba Ilmu Botanic Garden, and at that time Shu was a student volunteer, and we were just interested in the city because a lot of conservation work in Malaysia takes place outside of cities, understandably so, because there are a lot of endangered species and habitats. But we were curious about what's in our neighborhood, what's in our backyards. And so that was for a few years at Rimba Ilmu. But for this particular project, it's part of the Kampung City, which is a one-year project that I'm doing as part of the Applied Imagination Fellowship at CSI ASU, as you mentioned. And the purpose of this is really to rethink our relationship with nature, with our urban spaces, but using the lens of food. And why food? Well, if you look at how we usually approach nature and conservation, it's often from a scientific perspective, biology. When we talk about food, it's usually related to don't eat this or poaching and things like that. But food is a very, you might want to say, visceral thing. It's something very immediate. It's something very personal and emotional. And Malaysians love food.
Oh, don't we? Okay,
we do.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to get Syuhada to jump in here at this point, because what's interesting is we're actually near University Malaya. It's just, your alma mater is just, I think, 3 steps away. I don't know if this land actually belongs to them, potentially, right? So tell us about your interest in, because you're now the creative director. And so this concept, which is interesting, because Benjamin says, well, it's a way of getting us to relate to nature through something that's actually very close to our hearts, food, right? And imagine ancient human beings walking through a forest, picking up berries and foraging as they go along. So tell us a little bit about the concept and a bit about yourself and how it relates to developing these kinds of concepts.
So my background has been in ecology also, but back then I majored in zoology. I pretty much did a lot of animals, frogs and reptiles or whatever. And I was not interested in botany at all back then. But ever since this big garden, and it was during the pandemic, so we can't really go out much and see the toad in the background all the time. So somehow I picked up learning botany from there, learning more about plants. And then just like foraging stuff, from your backyard to your plate, from plant to pinggan.
Right. I mean, actually, it is very interesting because the COVID pandemic did, in fact, force a lot of us into very small spaces, and we're really cut off from the world, and many of the middle class Malaysians, at least, were getting their food through Food Panda, which is interesting because there you have this icon of conservation, the panda, being used by a company to kind of get this idea of transport. And I've seen pandas in China, and they don't move very fast. I can tell you that much. Okay, coming back to the idea of actually the interconnections. So Shraddha has actually pointed to this, right? There's the animal world and there's the plant world. We kind of think of it separate, but they're actually all intertwined. And I want to, Benjamin, if you can give us a sense, before we get to the garden, of that interconnection between the flora and the fauna in an urban setting.
Yes. So I think a lot of how we approach nature tends to be compartmentalized because we want to gain depth of understanding about plants and animals. But they're very interconnected, and I guess ecology speaks to that. And in an urban setting, that means that the animals that we see in the city are here because there's food, or they're looking for food or shelter, and the kind of plants that you plant or don't plant, your choice of landscaping practices, does affect what kind of animals you bring on or don't bring. And it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, there's a lot of evidence to show that there is benefits of nature, especially close to us. And I think the pandemic, and you brought that up, reinforced this point. When we couldn't travel and go on holidays, it really made a difference if you had a playground or a park nearby, if you had a tree outside your house or not. But that's the double-edged sword, is that we do not always welcome nature into our immediate spaces. We use labels like pests and weeds, and sometimes we are more afraid of nature than we need to be.
Right, and that's where we come back. Shraddha, when we walk through this garden, right? Because I think from the outside, most people from PJ, middle class people, think, "Oh my God, somebody's abandoned their house. It's overrun by weeds. It's probably breeding mosquitoes. It's a danger to the community." Is there another lens that we can use to think about what we see? I mean, we're going to be walking through that garden, right? It's chaos.
Yeah,
It's chaotic.
Yeah.
It's not like your normal, neatly arranged pot or whatsoever. Yeah, so we let things grow.
And why is that? Why should we let things grow? No, I mean, because there is this real, I think, demand, right, Benjamin, to kind of like order nature. We want to order nature, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when, okay, put it very simply, what happens when we let nature just do its own thing?
When you do that, at least from the observations that I've seen, you will see wildflowers growing, like plants that you did not plan to have. They will just start growing, and that attracts other animals like pollinators. Your butterflies will start coming in, your bees, and they create your own little ecosystem there. And of course, from there you will get your reptiles that also will come in to feed on these animals, and nature just flourish.
Okay, nature flourishing. I'm very interested because there's something that really bugs me, Benjamin, and I see this happen because the van that comes around that fogs. Fogging happens all the time because of the fear of dengue, right? And I think so in a lot of people's minds, this is a good thing. But I also know that fogging kills other pollinators. All the things that you just mentioned, Shraddha, that creates the flourishing of nature and all that. So how would you get us to think about that? Because that would be, in some sense, the pushback on your biodiversity garden, right?
Yes. So let's start with fogging. Fogging doesn't necessarily kill everything. There will always be survivors, and if you can think of it as escalation, you kill some proportion of the mosquito population, some survive, and they continue and it possibly get stronger over time. You're right, it also affects some other species, but in some ways we're grateful for the opportunity to experiment, and I think with pig, this land does belong to the university. In fact, our collaborators, Water Warriors, they're a living lab, so they run this place that we're in now, Rumah number 2, Rumah number 4, and they graciously allowed us to host the garden here. It began with the Center for Malaysian Indigenous Studies, CMIS, just further down the road. And I think what we need is experimentation, spaces to demonstrate. Because with these arguments, a lot of times, I think what we've learned is that you can only go so far with explaining it theoretically, even with a lot of science and evidence. But to show it, and indeed we will be visiting the garden shortly, to demonstrate it and to show what can be if we approached our spaces a little bit differently. I think that is the real learning, that is the real benefit of us doing here. And when we do that, I think what we realize and we learn is that it's complex. So yes, we have certain animals that we have to learn to live with. But it's also beautiful because there's so much that comes out of this garden. I mean, there is food for sure, but there's also a sense of reconnecting with our past, with our culture, especially when we talk about ulam species that we plant, for instance. Things that we don't get in supermarkets.
Okay, so this is interesting, right? Because I love ulam, right? I love our kind of local salad, as you like. But if I walk through that patch, I don't see things. I see, I see too much, and I can't identify. This kind of local knowledge, I know that some communities in Malaysia still retain, right? This ability to see and differentiate between the vegetation and what's possible, right? How, Syuhada, do we help people rethink or put a different lens on them so that they see their environment differently?
So we create programs for people to participate and show to them like how you can actually forage for food just in your backyard. So like part of the ImagiNASI program, so we have like days where we have activities. One of it is called urban foraging. So we'll just like bring people over and see like how this garden, it looks messy, it's wild. You might not be able to directly spot your ulam raja somewhere, but it is there somewhere, right? Yeah. So that's the joy of like just going around, and harvesting and foraging. And that's sort of how the kampung life was, that the plants are just wild in your backyard also. Yeah. So that's what we kind of like want to bring.
Right, because that's wonderful, because you had a couple, just the possibility, but also knowledge. I mean, there's a question of a personal knowledge. Okay.
So I think the partners we're I think the partners we're bringing on board for ImagiNASI, that's where a lot of the learning is. So we're having ecologists who are helping with foraging. We have you have some of this. We have East Shoots and Roots. We do urban farming. We've got groups, Orang Asli cooks coming. We've got food experimenters. We've got food rediscoverers. So basically the program of the different partners we're working with, some of them have an expertise in food, some have expertise in culture and knowledge, some have expertise in biology and ecology. And our assumption and what we believe is that we need these different perspectives to help us gain that better understanding.
Wonderful. Okay, that's a great point to take a break. We're going to be right back on Let's Talk, and we're going to be going to the Biodiversity Indigenous Garden next. Stay tuned to Let's Talk. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Benjamin Ong. He's an Applied Imagination Fellow with the Center for Science and the Imagination, Arizona State University. Also founder of the Urban Biodiversity Initiative in Malaysia. And we're looking at the ImagiNASI program. And the program is going to be here. At least one of the days is going to be here. Urban foraging, is it? Foraging, right? So you had this really nifty way of putting it together. You said it was rediscovering nature through food. And it reminds me of my attempts to understand Malaysian flora and fauna, these books that they are produced. Some of them very beautiful with lovely illustrations, but they're difficult to read, Benjamin, because you have to know sort of botanical taxonomies, in order to even locate something. So if you don't have that kind of knowledge, how else can you kind of introduce yourself to nature?
Yeah. So, I studied ecology, I studied botany, and so I went through all of that reading textbooks. But that's not how, you can say the layperson, that's not how most people relate to nature. We relate to nature on a more personal, more gut kind of level. And so when I used to work at the Rimba Ilmu Botanic Garden, a question that myself and my colleagues would often get from visitors, from tour groups, school groups is, boleh makan tak? Can we eat this and so on? And a lot of times we didn't have an answer to that. Yes, we might know that traditionally it's consumed in a certain way, but but we kind of didn't have that bridge to practice. So when I got the Applied Imagination Fellowship last year to do the Kampung City project, we thought let's pick up on this question. Let's start here and use food as that lens. It also happened during one of the MCOs, so at that time people were thinking a lot about hyper-local spaces. They were thinking about their gardens, their balconies, their kitchen sinks, and just these garden patches. People who never had green fingers started experimenting. So we thought it was a good time to revisit this concept of food and whether our urban landscapes are really nourishing us. So the thing is, when you read a book, right, and you see pictures of plants and long descriptions, technical, horticultural or scientific descriptions, well, my view is that it doesn't, you don't really absorb as much of it. You don't digest, no pun intended there. But when we go through the lens of food, you eat it, you remember it was part of this dish or that dish. It's something that you remember a lot more.
You're right, and I think the analogy maybe is be a dictionary. You can't learn a language just by going through the dictionary, right? You have to have the sentence, you have to have a narrative in which to kind of... And what's really interesting is that we often refer to edible plants as greens.
That's right.
But not everything that's green is edible. I mean, that is the shocking thing, right? So it looks like everything here could be in a bowl of salad, but that's not actually true. So, and this is, I don't know if you have the answer to this, but what differentiates a plant that is edible to the human species versus what isn't?
Experimentation.
Experimentation.
Trial and error, and if you're not poisoned, then it's edible. And I guess over many centuries, we kind of learned these lessons. But maybe if I could add to that, when we started this question, boleh makan tak? What I think one of the learnings is that some plants, yes, they are edible, they're directly usable, or you can throw it as a spice into food. But then there's also two other kinds of plants that even if they may not be directly edible, they're very important. I mean, there are food that, and Shu can tell you more about the Foliage project, which is like using plant leaves as wrappers. And we don't eat banana leaves, but they're essential in cooking, in food preparation, for instance. And then there's also plants that may not have any direct value, but they provide shade or shelter, and they create this conducive environment for the plants we do eat to grow. And I guess by extension you could say that's true of pollinators and other animals that may be considered to be pests, because they're part of that ecosystem, they're part of that community, that family of living things that actually enables the plants we do eat to thrive.
So this is interesting because it brings us to the question, I guess, of what's all this for? Is it just, I mean, I signed up for this because I just thought it was fascinating. And, we actually are in the same neighborhood as they were in Petaling Jaya. But are there policy implications? I mean, you talked about experimenting, and you talked about demonstrating, right, these concepts and these ideas. What should be, at the end of the day, the takeaway from an experience like this? And if you were speaking to a policymaker, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think if the simplest way, and maybe the most succinct message that we can say is, let wildness come in. That's probably not the most elegant way to say it, but make room for that which we do not need to control. Something along those lines, because when we look at urban spaces, and there's this whole practice, culture almost, of keeping things very neat, very orderly, and there are many reasons for that. Some of them are inherited from colonial days and their 18th or 19th century values that we need to re-evaluate and see if they're still relevant today. But the other thing about wild plants is as we explored neighborhoods and just saw plants growing, the thing about wild plants is they are often species that are very hardy. No matter how much we try to cut them down, kill them through weedicides and whatnot, they still come back and they survive. And many of these actually have some value, either indirect or directly, food included. So if there are plants that are so resilient, so hardy, that continue to thrive in our midst and they can be used for food, that's a fantastic resource right there. And we think that enabling this coexistence with wildness will actually be better for urban well-being, urban living.
Syuhada, you are the creative director of the Urban Biodiversity Initiative. I know this is your garden. I've heard it whispered in my ear that you are the mother of this garden.
The akak of the garden.
Okay, the akak. Okay, that's a little more egalitarian. Now, again, maybe you could just help us place this, because it looks like we're in a patch of, wilderness, more like a baluka. I think the Malay word would be like something like that, right? Not jungle, right? Not hutan, but kind of baluka. But we're actually in the heart of Petaling Jaya, next to the university, off a major road, Jalan University. It's not far from us, right? So what did it take? I mean, did you just, as the akka of the garden, did you just let it grow, or did you intervene in it? And if you did intervene, how did you intervene?
So we initially we had like grow tongs, and we planted some plants that we did designate the plants to the grow tongs. But other than that, and we did plant like just a few of these like kantans and ubi kayu, and after that we just let it grow, and you know, you start seeing like the smaller ubi kayu popping out here and there. Banana was not planned; it just popped out of nowhere. So then and slowly it just started, you know, flourishing and just growing wild.
Okay, so is there a method in the madness, as it were? I mean, what is the science behind this? Because I know biodiversity is the major idea, right? Is to encourage. So because you could have just all ubi kayu, and that wouldn't be, I guess, you know, the example of biodiversity. So how did you match it because you already came with some scientific knowledge about the way in which different plants interact? How did you do that?
We did nothing. we just let whatever, and the plants just decides to grow where they see fit, I guess. And after that, we start seeing other things. It just falls into a place. Yeah.
Right. So okay. So because in some sense, I guess birds come and pollinators come and seeds are carried around. You know, to make gardens like this flourish. Okay. So I know with this program, and I'm very excited. Because I think it's sort of, as you guys have put it together, it's like rediscovering nature through food, right? So could you walk us through some of the elements of the program? Because I know it's going to be a month, and there are all these other things that people can sign up for. Tell us a little bit about the program.
So we have like a month long of exhibition. That's free. Anyone can go in.
Is it here? Is the exhibition?
It will be at the Rimba Ilmu Botanic Garden in University Malaya, but it's only open during office hour. So we follow the university's office hour lah. And in between we have programs on weekends. So the first weekend is this weekend, 21st May and 22 May, where on the Saturday, the 21st May, we have urban foraging. So we'll be back here. Urban foraging will be here in the garden. So we'll walking around and forage for food, and we'll do some cooking after that. And on the Sunday, we have a variation of activities and programs throughout the day. So, for example, we will start off with the launch of the exhibition, and then we will have a guided walk, about 2 hours guided walk, and then we'll have a lunch by Kak Lisa Koyo, orang asli. So we get to taste indigenous food. And after that, we'll have a nature art workshop. So this will be from our artist friends. For this Sunday's one, it will be it's called Sepinggan Cyanotype. So the art is cyanotype printing. Yeah. And after that, we'll have another food makan session. It's a tea by Its Shoots and Roots called Plant Mixology. Yeah.
Okay, so why? So I know you seem to have a lot of collaborators that are not part of the world of science or botany and zoology, not formally anyway, right? Why is it? Why did you choose to work with artists, work with chefs, and people from indigenous communities in order to kind of deliver this message?
Well, I feel like for general public, there's different people have different taste. You know, just relating it to the topic, right? Yeah. So some people might relate it more with if they were to eat indigenous food, for example, or you can learn about nature through art, and having that diversity of backgrounds. I feel like that's a great way to just share the knowledge with people.
Right. Okay. So how do we get into this? So if somebody watching the show, you know, wants to participate, what should they do?
You can log into you can visit our website, ubi-my.com, and there is a link for you to pre-register for some of the activities. Programs are free and some are paid, so you can just look through the program list and select whichever one that you want. Exhibition is free.
Okay, great, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Shu, for that. I've been speaking to Siti Syuhada Sapno. She's the creative director with the Urban Biodiversity Initiative, and also Benjamin Ong, Applied Imagination Fellow with the Center for Science and the Imagination. Yes, there's something called applied imagination. That's another issue we might tackle at another opportunity. But that's all I have for you this week on Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, only for Astro AWANI.